All right, let's set the scene. Imagine you're living in the first century. There's this man. He's performing miracles, he's openly challenging the entire religious establishment, and he's claiming to speak for God himself. Now, this isn't just some friendly debate. We're talking about something with huge national importance, something that could be a matter of life and death. That was the reality, the high-stakes world of first-century Judea. So let's dive into how they were supposed to figure it all out.
You know, this wasn't just some thought experiment for them. It was a real, urgent question they had to answer. How in the world do you tell a true prophet from a really convincing fraud? Do you just go with your gut? Or is there an objective standard, a clear-cut test you can actually apply?
Well, it turns out, according to their own foundational text, the Torah, there absolutely was. God didn't just leave people to guess and hope for the best. No, He provided a clear, official standard, a divine rulebook, if you will, to know for sure if a prophet was legit.
And what's so powerful about this is how simple and direct it is. In Deuteronomy, it all boils down to two key tests. First up, the doctrinal test. Does this prophet's message, even if it comes with signs and wonders, try to lead you away from the God of Israel? That's a hard no. Second, the predictive test. When he makes a prophecy in God's name, does it actually happen? These two questions right there were the divine yardstick. And according to the Torah, that was it. That was the standard.
But here's where things get complicated. By the time Yeshua came on the scene, another standard had risen up. A completely different legal system had been growing for hundreds of years, and it was championed by the religious authorities of the day, especially the Pharisees.
These were called takkanot, and it's so important that we understand what these were. We're not talking about harmless traditions, like a special recipe for a holiday meal. No, takkanot, as the historical sources define them, were actual rules, man-made laws that could change or even flat-out cancel a written law from the Torah. In their system, these rules had the full force of law.
So you see the massive problem here, right? It's a fundamental conflict of authority. On one side, you've got the Torah, which was believed to be God's unchanging, eternal word. And on the other side, you've got takkanot, a system where men gave themselves the authority to tweak, change, and even overrule God's word. A collision was pretty much guaranteed.
And Yeshua's ministry became the flashpoint for that collision. He didn't just tiptoe around this debate. He walked directly into the heart of this clash between two totally competing legal systems.
And this right here, this is the key to understanding so many of those confrontations you read about in the Gospels. The primary conflict wasn't about Yeshua breaking God's actual law. It was about him deliberately and very publicly challenging the man-made takkanot and, by extension, the authority of the men who created them. Let me show you a perfect example.
Okay, picture this. A man has been paralyzed for 38 years. Yeshua heals him on the Sabbath and tells him, "Pick up your mat and walk." Now, to us, that just sounds like an amazing, compassionate act, right? But to the religious leaders of that time, oh, that was an act of open rebellion. And this just perfectly illustrates the whole conflict. I mean, the historical accounts are clear. This mat was a lightweight, simple thing, probably woven from palm fronds. The written Torah has absolutely zero, nothing, no prohibition against carrying something like that on the Sabbath. But, and this is the key part, it did violate a very specific rabbinic tapana. Yeshua's command was a calculated move, a direct challenge to their self-proclaimed authority to add to God's law. And right here, the leaders completely show their hand. Just listen to what they ask. Their question isn't, why do your disciples break the Torah? No, it's, why don't they follow the takkanot of the sages? Their number one concern, their actual standard for what was right and wrong, was obedience to their own man-made system.
Well, as you can imagine, this simmering conflict finally boils over. Yeshua is arrested and dragged before the Sanhedrin, which was the highest court in the land. This was it. This was their chance to officially apply the law and pass judgment.
So this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? They had the divine rulebook. They had those two crystal-clear tests from Deuteronomy right at their fingertips. Did they use them? Did they even try to bring forth witnesses to test his prophecies or prove he led people to worship other gods?
The historical record is pretty telling on this one. They couldn't find any credible witnesses. They made zero attempt to apply the Torah's official standard. The divine yardstick, the very test that God himself had provided, was completely ignored. They just set it aside.
So what was the real charge then? Blasphemy. Not because he broke the Torah, but because he broke their rules, their takkanot, and then claimed an authority that came straight from God, an authority higher than theirs. He was a fundamental threat to their entire religious system, which was built on the foundation of their takanat. He was judged and condemned by their standard, not by God's.
But of course, the story doesn't end there, not by a long shot. After the crucifixion and resurrection, something incredible happens, a stunning reversal. The verdict of the human court is about to get challenged by a much higher one.
It's just a few weeks later, during the bustling festival of Shavuot, and Peter stands up in the middle of Jerusalem, filled with this incredible new boldness. He goes and directly confronts the very same men who had condemned Yeshua. But he doesn't play by their rules. He goes right back to the divine rulebook.
And this is just brilliant. Peter quotes directly from Deuteronomy chapter 18, the exact same chapter that contains the official test for a prophet. He stands there and declares that Yeshua is the prophet that Moses himself said would one day come. This was an absolutely audacious and genius move. I mean, let's just break down this legal masterstroke for a second. Peter completely flips the script on them. He yanks the authority away from the Sanhedrin and puts it right back on the Torah, where it belongs. He argues that listening to Yeshua isn't some new thing, it's the ultimate act of being obedient to the Torah, which means rejecting Yeshua is the ultimate act of Torah disobedience, an offense punishable by being cut off from Israel. He literally judged them by the very divine standard they had deliberately chosen to ignore.
So when you boil it all down, this whole massive conflict really comes down to two totally irreconcilable standards. On one side, you have the divine yardstick from the Torah, the standard the apostles used to validate Yeshua. And on the other, you have the human ruler of the takanat, the standard the religious establishment used to condemn him.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question, one that echoes all the way down to today. In our own lives, when human traditions, no matter how old or well-intentioned they are, come into conflict with what we believe is divine law, which one gets the final say? Which one truly has the authority to define our faith?